In a small wooden box in the back of a bedroom drawer today at this moment in time, there is a brass key that has been kept in the box for many decades. The brass key has worn edges from many years of being carried in someone's pocket. The brass key opens nothing in this current house at all, in any way today. The brass key has actually been in the small wooden box for 43 full years now. The brass key was given to a man on the day he closed on the first land that his family bloodline had ever owned in the entire history of their existence today. He kept the brass key after he sold the property many years later in his life. He kept the brass key because the key was not just an ordinary house key at all. The brass key was the moment his bloodline stopped renting and started owning property. He was the very first person in his entire bloodline to own anything at all in life. He carried the brass key with him for the rest of his entire life going forward. When he eventually died at the end of his life, the brass key went to his son who would inherit the box and the key and the responsibility that came with both. His son added a second brass key to the small wooden box in the family drawer. The second key was for a small commercial building that the son had bought and owned. When the son eventually died, the small wooden box went to his daughter as inheritance. She added 3 more brass keys to the box during her own lifetime of ownership. When she eventually died, the small wooden box went to her own son as inheritance. He added 11 more brass keys to the box during his own lifetime of ownership. Tay, in a house 70 miles from where the original property once stood many years ago, the great-grandson of the man who carried the very first brass key in his pocket, sits at his desk today and signs the paperwork to acquire the 17th property in total, in a portfolio of properties that bears his entire family's name across generations of ownership. He does not see the brass keys anymore at all in any way at this moment. The brass keys are in the small wooden box that is in the bedroom drawer still. The bedroom drawer is in a house that has actually been in the family for 2 full generations. This is what generational wealth actually looks like in the world today in real terms. It is not a check that someone hands you at any point in time in your life. It is not a windfall that suddenly arrives in your accounts unexpectedly from somewhere outside. It is a brass key in a small wooden box and the slow, deliberate addition of more keys by people who understood that the box was actually not for them at all in their lives. The box was actually for the people who were not even born yet at the time. This is every level of how the box gets built over many generations of family wealth. He was born into absolutely nothing at all in his life at the very beginning of it. His parents had also been born into nothing before him in their generation of life. Their parents had been born into even less than that in their own generations of family life. The bloodline had no land or property or document with a family name to claim as ownership. That did not actually expire when the monthly rent was due at the end of each month. He worked the way that men of his particular era used to work in their lives. With a thermos full of hot coffee in his hand at 5 in the morning every day, and dirt under his fingernails by 6 in the morning, every single working day of his life. He raised 3 children in a small house that he did not actually own at all today. He paid monthly rent on the house for 41 full long years of his adult life. He paid monthly rent the year that he was 22 years old in his young adult life. He paid rent the year that his oldest child was actually born into the family unit. He paid monthly rent the year that his wife eventually died in his middle-aged years. He paid monthly rent the year that he turned 63 and realized something important about it. That the only thing his monthly rent had ever actually bought him in his lifetime today was permission to stay in the same exact address for one more single month of life. He did not actually save much money at all in his life going forward in time. There was not much money to save at any point in time in his adult life. He fed 3 children daily in the household and kept the lights on in the house. He kept the car running for the family to get around to all of their daily needs. The math at the end of the month rarely allowed for what we now call investment. The math at the end of the month was usually about which bill could be deferred today, and which bill could not be deferred to a later time without serious consequences for him. But he did one single small thing in his life that would matter much more than expected. He could not have actually known at the time about how important the one thing would become. One small thing that would matter more than he could have imagined possible in his lifetime. He told his oldest son on a Saturday afternoon when the son was 19 years old, that the day he would actually be most proud of in his entire life going forward would be the day his son actually owned something in his life of his very own. Anything at all to call his own, a house, or a piece of land, or a small store. Just one single thing in the entire world that has your own name on it as the owner. that you do not have to give back at the end of any month to anyone else. The father said this important sentence to his son one single time in his entire life today. He did not need to actually say the sentence again at any point in time after. The son actually carried the sentence in his pocket for the next 20 long years afterward, like a piece of carefully folded paper in his pocket through the years of his life. The father eventually died when he was 68 years old at the end of his life today. He had absolutely no inheritance to leave behind for his children at all in any way. He left behind only the sentence to his son in the most important inheritance of his life. The sentence itself was actually the entire inheritance he was leaving to his son today. The sentence would actually go on to build everything that came after in the family for generations. Every single key in the box would trace back to the words spoken on the Saturday afternoon. The son was 41 years old when he closed on the very first property of his life. 41 full long years he had carried the sentence in his pocket from his father. The property was actually small in size and dimensions compared to other houses at that time. A 2-bedroom house on a quarter-acre of land in a working-class neighborhood, 30 minutes from the city. The mortgage payment was tight on his monthly income at this point in his life today. The down payment had taken him 11 full long years to save up from his salary. He paid the down payment with a combination of his own cash savings from work, a small loan from his brother-in-law, plus the absolute exhaustion of saying no for a decade to every single small joy in his life that had a price tag attached to it. On the day of the closing, the real estate agent handed him a brass key on a ring. He did not say anything at all at the closing table after receiving the brass key today. He held the brass key in his palm for a long moment in time at the table. He thought about his late father who had been dead for 9 full years by then today. He thought about the sentence from his father on the Saturday afternoon many years ago. He thought about the 41 full long years it had taken to make the sentence finally true. He did not call anyone at all after the closing to share the news with them. He drove to the cemetery where his father was buried on the day of the closing today. He sat by his father's grave for 1 full hour at the cemetery in silence. He did not actually say anything out loud at the cemetery for the entire hour today. He held the brass key in his fist tightly throughout the entire hour at the grave. When he finally left the cemetery, the brass key went into a small wooden box at home. He kept the small wooden box in his bedroom drawer in his small 2-bedroom house. The brass key would stay in the small wooden box for the rest of his entire life today. He would never actually use the brass key again at any point in time going forward, because he would actually sell the first property 14 years later than the closing date today, and move into a slightly larger house with a completely different key for the new house. But the first brass key was actually not for opening doors at all in any meaningful way. The first brass key was a marker of something much more significant to the family bloodline. The marker said that the bloodline actually owns something now in the world for the first time. The bloodline has a foothold in the world that did not exist before this moment in time. The bloodline cannot actually be evicted from the world the way it could be evicted before, the way that it had been able to be evicted from the world before this moment today. He raised his own children in the small 2-bedroom house that he had bought with pride. He told his oldest daughter on a Sunday afternoon when she was 16 years old at home that the day she would actually understand him the most in her entire life going forward would be the day that she actually owned more than one of anything at all in life. More than one of anything: a house and an investment account, or a business and a small piece of land. The first thing that someone owns is actually the hardest one to acquire by far. The second one that someone owns is actually the proof that the first one was not luck. She did not understand the sentence at the age of 16 years old at the time today are. She would actually go on to understand the sentence at 34 years old in her life later, the year that she bought her second piece of property and added the second key to the box. The daughter was actually quite different from her own father in many important ways today, not because she was actually smarter than her father in any meaningful way at all in life, because she had inherited something important that her father had not had in his own life today. She had actually inherited the proof that owning property was possible for someone in her family. She did not have to convince herself that owning property was actually possible in her life, the way her father had spent 41 full long years convincing himself of that exact same thing. She actually walked into adulthood already convinced of the possibility of owning at her age today. The conviction itself was the inheritance from her father that mattered more than any money. The conviction itself was actually worth more than any amount of money could have been worth. She bought her first property at the age of 28 years old in her young adult life. A small condo in the city financed with a low down payment and a careful budget plan. She did not actually stop at her first property the way her father had stopped at his. She had read books that her own father had actually never read in his entire lifetime. She had taken classes that her own father had actually never taken in his entire lifetime. She had absorbed from the world that her father's owning had given her access to today, a vocabulary that her own father had actually not been allowed near at any point in life. She bought her second property at the age of 34 years old in her adult life today, a small 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood that was just beginning to gentrify economically. The property actually cash flowed from day one of ownership in her hands as a landlord today. The cash flow paid for the property management company that managed the property for her. The property management actually freed up her own time for other important pursuits in her life. She bought her third property at the age of 38 years old in her adult life today. By the time she was 45 years old in her career and life, she actually owned 3 rental units, a paid-off primary residence, and a brokerage portfolio that had been compounding for 17 years. The brass keys went into the small wooden box that she had inherited from her father today, the box which her father had kept in a bedroom drawer all of his life going forward. She actually moved the small wooden box to a small safe in her closet for safekeeping today. The brass keys, which had been one for her father's whole entire lifetime, were now 4 keys. The 4th brass key was actually the key to the small safe in her closet for the other keys. She told her son on a Tuesday evening when he was 14 years old at home together that the difference between her generation and her father's generation was actually a very important thing. Her father had to prove that owning property was even possible for someone in their family bloodline. She herself had to actually prove that owning property could become a complete system in life. He would have to actually prove that the system could become an institution in his own time. Each one of the family members has only one single job to do in their lifetime today. Build one more level than the person who came before you in the family lineage, and then pass the family wealth on to the next generation that comes after you in time. The son did not actually fully understand what his mother was saying to him at the time. He nodded politely in agreement with his mother at the time of the Tuesday evening conversation. He went to his bedroom upstairs in the house, and the sentence settled into him quietly. The way that the original sentence had settled into his grandfather many decades ago today, he would actually go on to carry the sentence for the next 26 years of his life. The son was actually 36 years old when he understood what his mother had meant by it. What his mother had meant by the system becoming an institution in the family lineage today. He was sitting in the office of an estate planning attorney on that day in his career. He had inherited 2 of his mother's properties when she died earlier in his adult life. He had actually bought 4 more rental properties on his own by the time he was 35. The portfolio was actively growing in size and value over the years of his career today. The cash flow from the portfolio was actually substantial at this point in his career today. The wealth was no longer a thing that he could simply keep in a drawer or a safe. The estate planning attorney explained the entire structure that he was about to build for him. A legal trust which was not just an ordinary will at the end of his lifetime today. A trust which would actually hold all the family assets in a single structured container together, which would distribute the assets according to the specific terms that he set out in life, which would actually survive him after he died at the end of his entire lifetime today, which would have a successor trustee in place to take over after his lifetime ends in time, which would actually generate ongoing income for his children and his grandchildren for many years, and the children of his grandchildren after them all in the future ahead in time today, all without anyone in the family ever having to start over again from zero in their lives, without anyone in the family ever having to build everything from the bare ground up again. He understood in the attorney's office what the great quiet project of his life was today. The project was not actually to make more money for himself at all in his lifetime. The project was actually to build the container that would hold the money across generations now. Across many generations that he would never actually meet at any point in his lifetime today. The container was actually the entire institution that the family would become going forward in time. The container was the formal structure that would hold the family wealth across many generations. The container was the very thing his mother had been preparing him to build all along. On the Tuesday evening when he was 14 years old by passing him the family sentence. He actually signed all the documents at the estate planning attorney's office on that day. He went home from the attorney's office and added a symbolic key to the wooden box. The key was actually symbolic now because the institution that he had built did not have a single key. The institution had attorneys and accountants and a successor trustee and a system of records. The institution had actually outgrown the small wooden box that contained the original brass keys, he told his daughter on a Saturday morning when she was 11 years old at home together. Her job when she actually grew up would not be to add more property to the family at all. Her job would actually be to keep the structure intact across the generations of family life. To not actually break what the family had already built together over the past 4 generations. To pass the structure on to the next generation without losing any of what was built. The hardest job in the family is actually not the building of the wealth and structure at all. The hardest job in the family is actually the keeping of what has been built across the years. She did not understand the lesson at all at the age of 11 years old in her life today. She would actually go on to understand the lesson when she was 32 years old in her life. When she would actually become the successor trustee of the family trust and structure in her life, she would learn that her father had actually been completely right about everything he said. The daughter actually inherited the entire family structure when her father eventually died at home. She was 38 years old at the time of his death, and her receiving the inheritance. She had actually 3 children of her very own by the time of her father's death today. She had throughout her own adult life been working as a teacher in the local school. A job that she actually loved deeply for many reasons in her life as a working teacher. A job that paid her actually less than her family's structure produced in a single quarter year. The temptation when she actually became the trustee of the family was significant in her life today. The structure threw off enough income that she could have lived a very different kind of life. She could have actually stopped teaching at the local school at any point in time today. She could have moved her family to a much larger house in a different neighborhood somewhere. She could have sent her 3 children to expensive private schools that her teacher's salary did not cover. She could have in the small ways and the large ways used the structure to upgrade her existence. She did not actually do any of those things at any point in time in her own life today. She kept teaching at the same local school year after year despite the financial freedom she had. She kept the smaller modest house that she had been living in all along for many years. She sent her 3 children to the same public schools that she herself had attended as a child. She drew from the family structure only what was actually needed to maintain it and family things, to fund the things that actually mattered like her children's college educations going forward. And the small medical fund that she set aside for her aging elderly mother who needed it today. The rest of the family money she actually left where it was in the family structure. The family structure actually continued to compound in value year after year of her stewardship today. The structure in her years as the steward grew significantly larger than when her father gave it. She understood in a way that took her into her 40s to actually fully articulate in words that the family's wealth was actually not for any one single generation to enjoy alone in life. The family's wealth was actually a flame that each generation was responsible for keeping lit. Each generation had a responsibility to make sure the flame did not go out on their watch. Her great-grandfather had actually lit the original flame at the beginning of the family lineage today. Her grandfather had built the lamp around the flame to protect it from being blown out. Her grandmother had built the structure that protected the lamp around the flame for future generations. Her father had built the institution that would hold the lamp across centuries of family time. Her job was actually simply to not blow the flame out at any point in time today. Her job was actually to pass the lamp forward still lit to the generation behind her. She told her oldest son on a Sunday evening when he was 17 years old at home that the only thing that he actually ever needed to remember in his entire life was this. The family is actually older than you are at this point in your life going forward today. The structure is older than you are at this point in your life going forward in time. Your job is actually to be smaller than both the family and the structure together today. The day you start to actually think the wealth is yours is the day you become the breaker. The generation that actually breaks what has been built up over the years of family history. He carried the sentence with him into his 20s and beyond as he grew older in life. He has not actually forgotten the sentence at any point in time in his life today. He will not forget the sentence at any point in time in his life going forward into the future. The sentence is actually the only single thing he will pass to his own children in his life. And the sentence will be more than enough for them to actually carry the structure forward. The son was actually 33 years old when he became a co-trustee with his mother together. He took on the active management of the family portfolio while she focused on the family side. He was actually not interested in the lifestyle that the family wealth could fund for him. He had absorbed his mother's stewardship the way a child absorbs the body language of a parent. The family wealth was actually not for him at all in any meaningful way today. The family wealth was simply a thing he was responsible for growing without harming any of it. He actually expanded the family map in directions that no previous generation had ever attempted. The family had been concentrated in 2 states for 3 generations of the family's history today. He looked at the entire global landscape of opportunities available in the modern world economy today. He acquired commercial property in 2 more countries that the family had never operated in before. He invested in private companies in industries that the family had never been in before today. He hired professional analysts to assist him in evaluating opportunities for the family portfolio. He hired professional strategists to help him think across continents and decades of long-term planning. He built beneath the legal structure his grandfather had set up an operational layer of management. The operational layer could actually think across continents and decades of strategic time horizons today. The brass keys by this point in the family history were actually a metaphor only in his life. The family no longer kept track of physical brass keys at any point in time today. The family actually kept track of equity stakes and holding companies in the business structures instead. And beneficiary lists and a quarterly governance report that actually ran 90 full pages long each. The family employed 7 full-time professionals to actively manage the entire family wealth structure. The family actually paid the 7 professionals very well for the work they performed daily. The family understood that the people who manage the structure are actually part of the structure. The structure cannot actually survive without paying its custodians the kind of compensation that buys, the kind of loyalty across many decades of devoted institutional service to the family structure. He actually had 3 children of his own by this point in his life going forward today. He told them when they were actually old enough to understand the family structure and meaning. The exact same thing that his own mother had told him many years earlier when he was a young boy. The family wealth is actually not yours at all in any meaningful way at this point in your life. You are actually part of the entire lineage of the family going back several generations of time. The lineage is older than you are at this point in your young life going forward today. The lineage will actually be older than your own children at the time of their own lives. Your job is actually the same as my job, and your grandmother's job and her father's job today. Do not actually break what was passed to you at any point in time during your lifetime. Add what you actually can to the family structure during your lifetime of stewardship in your life. And pass the family structure on to the next generation after you in time going forward. They nodded silently as children do when they listen to their parents speak to them today. They were actually quite young at the time of the family conversation about the wealth and structure. The sentence would actually settle into them quietly the way it had settled into him in his time. The sentence would actually carry them when the day came that they had to carry the structure they would have to carry alone after he was gone from his lifetime in time. The same way that he himself had carried the structure after his own mother was gone today. And the same way her grandmother had carried it after her grandfather was gone before her. By the 7th generation of the family has actually become something quite different now. The family bloodline has been compounding wealth for over an entire century of continuous family time. The original brass key is actually in a museum case in the entryway of the main residence today. A small plaque underneath the case explains what the key actually was in family history. Visitors do not actually always read the small plaque underneath the case in the entryway today. Family members walk past the museum case every single day without noticing the brass key inside. The brass key is actually too small a thing to look at in this house at this point, in a house that has actually come to contain so much wealth and so many family things today. The family structure now actually spans multiple foundations operating across many domains of activity today, 3 operating businesses owned and managed by the family across multiple sectors of commerce, a real estate portfolio that actually spans across 9 different countries of the world today, a private investment arm that has actually begun to fund infrastructure projects in developing economies. The family does not actually know the daily figure of its own wealth at all in any way today. The figure is monitored by a chief financial officer who reports quarterly to the family council. The family council meets actually 4 times a year in a regular institutional meeting schedule today. The council is composed of the senior members of the 7th generation in the family lineage, and a non-family member who has actually been hired specifically for the family council role today, to keep the family from making decisions that benefit one branch at the expense of another. The family is actually no longer rich in any meaningful way in the modern world today. Rich is actually a word that applies to people who can buy things they could not buy yesterday. The family actually stopped being rich 4 full generations ago in the family lineage history today. The family is actually now an institution older than most of the businesses it owns in the world. The institution is actually older than most of the laws under which it operates in the world. The institution will actually be older than the people in this room when these people are gone. The most important thing about the seventh generation of the family is actually a single truth today. None of the seventh generation actually know what it feels like to be the original renter. They have actually read about the original renter in family historical documents and records today. They have seen photographs of the renter that have been preserved across the years of family time. They have actually walked past the brass key in the museum case many times in their lives. But they cannot actually feel his weeks at all in any meaningful way during their own daily life. They cannot actually feel the math at the end of his month at all in any way today. They cannot actually feel the Saturday afternoon when he told his 19-year-old son the original sentence. The proudest day of his entire life would actually be the day his son owned something at all. They cannot actually feel any of it at this point in their generation of the family today. And the fact that they cannot actually feel it is more than anything else the proof today. The proof that the original renter actually succeeded in his entire mission of generational wealth building. He succeeded so completely in his mission that his great-great-great-grandchildren actually do not need to know. They do not need to know what he had to know in order to make this all happen. They actually get to know other completely different things instead in their generation of family life. They get to know what wealth is actually for when wealth is no longer the central question. They actually get to know how to build and how to give and how to think across centuries, instead of how to think across months or weeks the way the original renter had to think. The original renter actually built the foundational floor of the entire family wealth structure today. 6 generations actually stood on the floor and built the building of wealth on top of it. The 7th generation actually lives in the top room of the entire family wealth building today. They look out the window at a horizon that the renter could not have actually imagined. They do not actually know they are standing on the renter's shoulders at all in any way today. They do not have to know they are standing on the renter's shoulders at any time in their lives. The not knowing is actually the gift he was building toward all along in his original mission. On a Saturday afternoon when he told his son a sentence he could not have known would build a dynasty. The original renter could not have actually known that his single sentence would build a dynasty today. He could not have known what his single sentence would do over the centuries of family time. Generational wealth is actually not something that one single person actually builds at all today. Generational wealth is actually something that one single person starts at the beginning of a lineage. The first generation actually suffers the most of all the generations in the family lineage today. The first generation actually builds the entire foundation with their absolutely bare hands alone in life. The first generation does not actually get to enjoy what they construct in their own lifetime today. The first generation gets to know something else completely different instead in their own lifetime. The first generation actually gets to know that the bloodline will not begin again from zero today, that somewhere in the future ahead someone with their last name will look at a vast horizon. A horizon that the first generation actually made possible without ever seeing it themselves in life. If you are actually the first generation in your bloodline, the work is harder than anyone will know. The work that you do is actually the most important work that you will do in your entire life today. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one on the journey of building wealth. The next chapter is actually about how to start the family wealth structure of your own today, even if you are actually the very first person in your family to build one in your generation.